So let's move along to problem number 8. The fifth grade classes at Brookfield School used 5 identical buses to go on a field trip. There were a total of 40 seats on each bus. All of the seats on 4 buses were filled. The fifth bus had 4/5 of the seats filled, and 1/8 of all of the passengers on the buses were adults. How many adults were on the field trip with the fifth grade class? Wow, lots of information. So we need to stop and think and remind ourselves what it is that we need to find. Those sentences really let us know what it is that we need to find. So take a look at mine. Mine says there were adults on the field trip. So we know on this field trip there were students and there were adults. Another thing that we know is we know that there were 5 buses, but not all of those buses were full. Only 4 buses were filled. And the fifth bus was partially filled with 4/5 filled. So we need to find out how many total people were on this trip first before we can figure out the 1/8 that are adults. So let's start off by finding out how many people were on the trip on those 4 full buses. So the 4 full buses, to figure out how many people were on those buses, we would take the 40 people that it could seat and multiply it by 4, and we would find out that 160 people were on the 4 full buses. So next, we need to figure out how many people were on that partially filled bus, that fifth bus. So bus number 5, okay, or that fifth bus, had 4/5 of the seats filled. So it had 4/5 of the 40 seats that were there. It had 4/5 of 40. Remember, when we can put a number in front of the word of and a number after the word of, that is going to tell us that we have to multiply those two numbers. So, I know that I need to, if I'm going to multiply fractions, I need to have 2 fractions. So, I can look and I can ask myself, can I cross divide for this problem? And I can see that I can cross divide with a 5 and the 40. I can think about dividing both of those numbers by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 40 divided by 5 is 8. So now that I have simpler numbers, I can go ahead and I can multiply my numerators. 4 times 8 gives me 32, and I'm going to multiply my denominators. 1 times 1 gives me 1, and I find out that there are 32 people on that fifth bus. So now I need to find out the total number of people on the trip, because remember we had those 4 full buses and that one part of a bus. So to find out that total, I can add 160 plus 32, and I would find out that there were 192 people total on the trip. Wow, 3 steps so far, and I'm still not to my answer, because remember, I want to find out there were how many adults on the field trip. So if I put that 192 in my sentence and said there were 192 adults on the field trip, I'd go, what? That doesn't seem right. Again, the sentences help us to know if our answers are reasonable. So now we know that 1/8 of all the passengers are on the buses were adults. So we know 1/8 of 192 passengers. Again, we have that word of that's helping us to know that we need to multiply. If I can think about a number in front, 1/8 of 192, a number in front of the word of and a number after, I know that I need to multiply 1/8 times 192, and notice that I made that a fraction. I put the 192 over the 1 to make it a fraction, because I need two fractions to multiply. Now I'm looking, and I can see that I could probably cross divide for this, but I also see that I have two 1s. So it might be just as easy to multiply my numerators and multiply my denominators, because that's going to create a fraction division that will help me to find how many adults were on this trip. So I now see that I need to divide 192 divided by 8. Remember, the top dog, top number of the fraction, goes in the division house. Top dog in the house. So now I can go ahead and divide 8. How many 8s are in 19? I know that there are 2. Subtract my 16. Bring down my 2. And now I need to know how many 8s are in 32. 4. 4 times 8 is 32. I'm going to subtract, and I have 0 left over. And this tells me my final answer, that there were 24 adults on the field trip. Notice I circled my final answer. It's important that your answer is very clear to whoever's looking at your paper.